So welcome to another BTCC Roundup show. Well, I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague Matt Salisbury, who's going to be going through a few stats and figures and throw a few other bits of information at us as we look back at Thruxton from a couple of weeks ago, but also towards this weekend when we've got Alton Park coming up, which is a fantastic circuit as well. Some really great circuits to chat about. But we're joined by our guest today, is David Addison, who's obviously, as you all know, the BTCC commentator for ITV, does a fantastic job, stabs a few rats along the way, but really looking forward to hearing what David has to say. But going back to Thruxton, I mean, really the man of the moment and also the driver of the weekend voted by the fans on the app was Josh Cook. And I thought, David, he did a fantastic job and really, really sort of nailed his flag to the masthead to be a really serious championship contender.
Absolutely. I mean, we kind of ran out of adjectives about how good he was, really, because he never put a wheel wrong. And I was talking to somebody else about this for a podcast a couple of weeks ago, but before Thruxton, and saying how different, in a way, Josh is now from when he first came into the championship. And that's true of others. You know, Tom Ingram is another example of how the young drivers over the years have got better and better and better, and the errors aren't there anymore. That desperation to do well. You know, we'd see it with people in the past. They'd get a rare fourth or fifth on the grid and suddenly get all excited because they thought they had a real chance of winning the race from there, instead of thinking about banking points, keeping out of trouble and working on for races 2 or 3. And Josh was guilty of that to a degree a few years ago. But you saw it at Brands for 2 races with all that pressure to win, and again at Thruxton, just doing an outstanding job. And I know we keep going on about him being the king of Thruxton. Josh isn't entirely sure why it works, because although he's registered there as an instructor, he's never actually done very much instructing there. But there is something about that place and him that just gels. And you could argue that it's actually harder now because he goes there with an increasing level of expectation. But you know, he rose to the challenge again over those 2 races. It's great to see, and I think it's also great to see how BTC Racing is doing, because that was a team that came in at the back end of the grid. Yes, okay, it's gone through different incarnations now, with Steve Dudman buying in with Bert Taylor and then taking over and bringing Danny Buxton in. But it's another example, a bit like Speedworks has been in the past, of a team going from the back of the grid to the back of midfield, to the front of midfield, to the podium, to winning, to now leading the championship. And I think that's as encouraging for other teams looking at it as it is for other drivers looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, how about you, Matt? What do you think about the weekend that we had at Thruxton?
Well, I think for BTC Racing, I think it's quite encouraging when you consider where they were at Donington Park at the start of the season, because they had the fair share of problems there. They were obviously struggling a little bit with new M Sport engines. So the fact that they've now gone to Brands Hatch and to Thruxton and taken 2 wins out of 3, pretty impressive progress across the course of 3 meetings. I mean, Josh, like David said, he's a driver who I think has matured an awful lot. I think if you look back to his debut season when he was racing the Chevrolet for PowerMaxed, probably one of the standout moments from that season was at Donington Park. He had that battle going down the Craner curves. There were cars on the grass. They were going all over the place. You can't imagine Josh now getting himself into a situation like that, because he's got that experience behind him now. He knows when he needs to stick the car down the inside, when he needs to make a move, and he knows when he needs to just bank the points. And I mean, speaking to him at Thruxton, he said, it's great, to take 2 wins at Brands Hatch was fantastic. To then come and do it again here is brilliant, but we could go to Alton Park and be absolutely nowhere. And then it'll be a case of just banking the points and getting the most that we can from the weekends when things don't go to plan. And I think that's a new sign of maturity in Josh that's going to do him well through the rest of the year.
Well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, he's really come on leaps and bounds, as has the team as well. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of new technical side this year, because obviously we've got the hybrid system, which has altered the racing. It is different than just banging weight in the car and then people disappearing down to the midfield, which is what happened before. Now it does allow the driver to still fight a little bit at the front, which I actually prefer, to be honest, rather than just handicapping people right out of the equation. I think this gives people a little bit more. I think we'll see that after this meeting, because I'm not sure. They have an adjustment every 3 meetings, but because we had a wet one at Brands, I think they maybe have left that a little bit. I actually think it needs to be a little bit harsher. And the leader, if they want to make it so that it balances it out a little bit, the leader does have to have a lot less hybrid to play with, because at the moment I don't think it makes as much a difference really. I mean, what do you think, David, with that? I mean, because it has changed the mathematics of the racing, because they can still battle near the front or in the top 5 or 6, even with maximum hybrid success ballast, if you like.
I think what we've seen is you're right, a different type of racing. I think it's a purer racing. It's a cleaner racing, and it's got rid of that. To the outside looking in, that crash fest that the championship's reputation had unfairly become, because you had this cork in the bottle, and at some places, like Alton Park as an example, the only way to get past a car with 75 kilos was to give it a shove, get it out of the way. We don't have that anymore. So I quite like the fact that the racing is a lot cleaner, but I do think that maybe the hybrid could be more advantageous. If it was 2.5 tenths around Donington, that's not the same as a car with 75 kilos racing against a car with 45 kilos, for the sake of argument. So maybe there needs to be a bit more oomph in that hybrid, because at the moment it's giving you that option of pulling away by a length or closing up by a length. Now, it depends what you're trying to achieve by the success penalty, whether it's weight, whether it's hybrid. Are you trying to make the racing exciting? Are you trying to give people a leg up? It does give people a leg up, but is it a big enough leg, as it were, to really shuffle the racing in the same way that the weight did? I get why teams and drivers like the current format, because you know what the car is and you can engineer accordingly. But I think the variable of the weight has got. Maybe if you brought the option tyre back, that would be a factor as well. But obviously with a new M Sport engine for the TOCA teams and the hybrid, there was a lot for people to get used to. Alton, I'm not sure how it's going to work. I genuinely am not, because it's a narrow circuit. And Alton, it gives close racing, but that's because it's narrow and people struggle to overtake. Is the hybrid going to be enough, coming, say, out of the Island Bend hairpin with a bit more oomph to get the job done? We'll find out on Sunday.
No, that's right. I mean, I see the other side of it as well is when you had 75 kilos on board, and obviously increments down to 10th place, what you also had, as well as the outright performance, was degradation on brakes and tyres, which especially Alton Park is a place that, that's where you struggle as well. So it was a double whammy. So that's why I just think, I think it needs a little, I think it needs a tweak. It doesn't need, and I'm sure it's a new thing. And TOCA do tweak things to make the racing as good as possible. It's there as entertainment, and it does entertain. I mean, you can't, you've got a very strong argument really that it's the best racing in the world. When you watch anything else. So I mean, actually, I think it's a little bit more and it'll work. But what it isn't doing is getting drivers who are at the top of. Josh Cook is in a very strong position, whereas actually before you could see a little bit like, the Tour de France or something. Leader could be out, but then the pack starts catching them up because they haven't got the toe of the whole pack. It's a similar sort of thing. I think it's in a little bit more, and then it'll be perfect, because I do prefer, as you say, having a purer form of racing, which I think gains the series a lot more respect around the world as well.
I think it's reflected as well in what we've seen so far this season, that we've had, in those 3 rounds, we've got drivers who are coming to the end of the race without having used up all their hybrid. That suggests that maybe there are a few little tweaks, because if you've got a driver out front who doesn't feel the need to use his hybrid, fans might look at that and say, well, why have we got it then? Why don't we just ditch hybrid altogether? I think there were quite a few fans who were maybe thinking we were going to have something a bit more like DRS from this hybrid system, which isn't what we wanted, because you don't want it to be a case of a driver can just press a button and he races off into the distance ahead of someone. So I don't think there's a massive amount wrong with it. It may be just like you say, it's those few little tweaks so that someone does gain a but more of an advantage from having it than they currently do at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I agree. And also, we're going now to a completely different circuit to Thruxton. Still a real old school circuit, but a completely different job for the engineers and for the drivers. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how hybrid works with that. And also, obviously, you've got the new M Sport engine, which I've got to say I've been really impressed by. I remember when the first TOCA variant of engine came out, and obviously it was a completely new thing then. And Swindon with the Hyundai engine, but also M Sport with the Ford engine, which is the TOCA engine. I think they've both done a brilliant job to have an engine that's competitive, but also reliable, because that's the key thing. You've got to have reliability.
I think M Sport have made a few strides, and I think they've learnt a lot since they came into the paddock at the start of this season. I know there are a few disappointed teams at Donington, and there were quite a few earnest conversations, and M Sport said, yes, we're aware of that problem and that problem and that problem, and we'll try harder. So yes, I think they are also making strides. There is a lot that's new, not only in terms of the technology, but also the companies that are doing it. Cosworth for that hybrid unit, M Sport for the engine. They're coming into different environments, especially M Sport. I know they've had their GT racing background, but now building engines and supplying customers and having to make those engines for different cars, but also make those engines that then have to have something from another supplier bolted on to make it all work. Yes, there's a lot to get your head around for everybody.
There's
involved.
a lot of spinning plates there, I think. I mean, I was, when I was running the team, I've got to say I wasn't a massive fan of introducing the hybrid, and as everybody knows in the paddock, that was quite a common theme from me. I actually quite enjoy it, but probably because I don't have to worry about the bills now. So that's probably why I'm thinking about it slightly differently. I'm looking at it from the other side of the fence. But I think it has added something, and I think it has. At the end of the day, we're all looking at sustainability and how to make, and motorsport needs to tick every box to make sure it doesn't get cancelled, really. Otherwise, it's got to be seen to be pushing forward boundaries. And motorsport, like having a war, really, it always pushes technology forward because people are always striving. It's lots of clever people in the paddock. They're all striving to make things much better. So I think it will make a big difference. And I think it puts Josh Cook in a good position, because I don't think you're going to see the pack catching him as quickly as they would have done with Success Palace. So it'd be interesting to see. But I mean, going forward to Alton Park, I mean, looking at Thruxton, really. I mean, so before we go to Alton Park, I mean, Josh Cook really was the standout player there. But I think there were a lot of people who were sort of willing Jason Plato maybe to convert that pole position into his 98th win, I think. Is that right, Matt? You're a man with the stats. Isn't there a bit of a query about one of the stats? There's one race that couldn't be counted or might not have been counted or something like that. I don't know. I'm not good at that sort of stuff, but you'll probably know.
That's a whole can of worms you'll be opening.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I'll keep that shut then. I'll keep that shut.
That's a discussion me and David have had a few times in the past about Jason's win record and what Jason was saying and what everyone else was saying. It all goes back to that 2001 season when you had production cars and you had guest MGs that weren't scoring points, and it's all a bit awkward, but I think the records at the moment say 97, so it's 98.
We're sticking with that. Jason's 98 win is on the basis that, as Matt says, that Silverstone race, the first car over the line was the production class car. The first touring class car wasn't eligible for points. So Jason crossed the line third, but got maximum points in his class and counts that as a win.
Okay. I must admit, I mean, that's fine. Who am I to answer, with a guy who's won 97 or 98 races at the end of the day? He's won a lot of races, hasn't he? But it would have been great. And I thought he was hanging on to Ash Sutton and he was looking really feisty. And then just lost the front end a little bit at Church. I mean, talking about Church, Josh Cook, that's one place. He was earning his bravery points there that weekend. The guy was lit through there. I mean, and again, with helping Jake over the race weekends, he said, "I can't match him through there. He's too quick," and that's coming from Jake, because he usually he's trying his absolute hardest not to be outdone by anybody. But he was immense through there. So it'd be interesting to see how it works going forward. But I mean going forward to Alton Park, I mean who do you see as a strong? I mean one team I think might suddenly jump up at Alton Park are the Toyotas. Local circuit for them. They did well last year. I think they're due a result. They've got the pace, but seem to be getting involved in accidents when they don't need to have accidents. And sort of the pace seems to be a little up and down. But going to Alton Park, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Rory Butcher up there.
I would go along with that. He's got the ability to do it. I think one of the downsides for the Toyotas is true of other teams, and it is in turn adding to the importance of qualifying these days, which is that if you have a bad qualifying, you are stuck for that first race. It's very, very hard to make progress now because of, as we've discussed, the relative ability of the hybrid compared to weight to shuffle the order. So I'm not suggesting it's Formula 3 with a roof on, but if you're 16th on the grid, it's very hard to make progress with that, even with the hybrid, because it's got a limited benefit. So, that qualifying session becomes massively important these days. And they've had a few dramas in qualifying. If you think back to Rory at Brands, about half an hour before qualifying, somebody came along with an update for the software, which was plugged into the wrong port and melted the ECU or something like that. So they then had this mad panic to change parts before qualifying. Not what the team needed, not what the driver's state of mind needs. That put them on the back foot a little bit there. There was that roll of the dice for the Toyota on the tyres for the first race at Brands that nearly worked. But yeah, I think that the Toyotas, certainly Rory's car, you could have expected more from this year. What's he had? He's had one podium, that's all. Ricky Collard's still getting used to front wheel drive, and he's also struggling, as I understand it, to operate the hybrid push button.
Right. Yeah.
When he's turning the wheel, because he has a long-standing hand injury that limits his mobility. Plus, he's not very big bloke, and he's got pretty small hands anyway, so he actually struggles when he's sort of turning the wheel to press the button. But it's the only part to press the button that's homologated. There isn't an option yet, so he's a bit stuck with it. So he's still trying to get his head around that. And of course, like all the teams, it's the same, Shaun, with your BMWs in a sense. Although it looks like the same car as last year, because of the weight that's put in there with that battery, they've all had to be re-engineered up to a point. And maybe it's harder to do it on that short, stubby Corolla shape compared to another car. But yeah, home circuit, you're absolutely right. There's a good result in the post, so where better to do it than Alton for them.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, another driver, actually, when I'm thinking about it, who's got better and better and better as the season's gone on, because I was a little bit disappointed in at Brands. I thought he might be really on it, but it's actually him and his teammate, to be honest. Michael Crease, who we had on the programme a couple of weeks ago, but also Ash Hand. I thought he's really started to show his pace, but also sort of the racecraft that we all know he has from the Support Series a couple of years ago. And I think he could go well. And that car has gone well around Alton Park as well.
Yeah, I mean, they did look good at Thruxton, you're absolutely right. But traditionally, the Astras have gone well there. Do you remember Jason was up at the pointy end, certainly the first visit to Thruxton last season. It's pleasing to see Ash Hand doing so well after a relatively long layoff from this type of racing. I know he did a bit of GT stuff, but we've not really seen much of him. And yet, in the space of 3 meetings, there he is bagging top 10 results, which is good to see. Where next? Is that Astra going to be good across all circuits, or is it a bit circuit specific? Was it good at Thruxton because it's always good at Thruxton? Is that going to translate elsewhere? Again, time will tell. Yes, in theory, that car should be up there because it's well developed. Flip side of being well developed is it's an old car. It's one of the older makes and shapes on the grid now. So there might be that in the negative column. But both of them raced really well at Thruxton, and that was good to see, to have some different people up near the pointy end here.
No, definitely. I mean, Matt, what do you think? Anybody else who you think might stand out a little bit and maybe come to the fore at Alton Park?
Well, I think another team that needs to come to the fore a bit more at Alton Park is Laser Tools Racing, because a bit like Speedworks, they've had a tough start to the season so far, and they're suffering from the issue that David touched on there with having to change the car around to deal with the new engine and the hybrid system. The Infinity now is a completely different car to the one that Ash Sutton won the title in last season. There's had to be an awful lot of work has had to go into re-engineering the front end of that car. And I think the team is finding it tough at the moment. And the loss of the engineering team that have gone with Ash over to Motorbase can't be underestimated either. But, I think 3 rounds in, Dexter Patterson hasn't scored a point yet. That's fair enough. He's a rookie, he's still learning the ropes. But, Aidan Moffat's only got a handful of points on the board, and I think Aidan himself would have been expecting a lot more from the first 3 rounds so far. Alton Park's a circuit where the car has gone well in the past. It's a circuit that, you could say favours rear-wheel drive a little bit. So I think they'd be hoping to take a step forwards, because so far the title defence, teams championship, that kind of thing, it has been a difficult one for them.
So just before we sort of go into the full Alton Park scenario and see who we reckon is going to be quick up there and who's not, David, on your wall behind you, Porsche 917s are taking a quite a which would be probably one of the scarier cars to drive in period. You're sat in a bird cage, really, aren't you? With not a lot around
Exactly.
you, and going very, very fast with lots of fuel on board. But I mean, as well as touring cars, which I mean, you love all different sorts of motorsport, because I know you're really into your short oval stuff as well, which I love as well. I know I've done a little bit of short oval in Formula 2 stock car, F1 stock car. I've still got a bad neck from it from about 40 years ago. I think they saw me as a bit of a target, as a bit of a one-off to be there. But that was Frankie Wainman Jr., who you'll know well. It was his car that I raced once, but it was great fun. But it's obviously into British touring cars. But GTs is another real love. I mean, I hear you a lot when I'm watching the SRO GT stuff. So the big question is, what excites you most as a commentator when you're commentating? What's the series that really gets you going? And remember, you're on the BTCC app.
The next race. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the next race, because you've no idea what that next race is going to show. Whether it's a stock car race, whether it's a GT race, whether it's a touring car race, you genuinely do not know. So, I mean, I can get all nostalgic about other races that I've seen, but the most exciting one is the one that's about to happen, because it could be anything. It could have a mega battle for the lead. It could be quite processional, but you don't know until you're going through it.
See, that's what I always like that about you, because you've got massive enthusiasm for motorsport. Whereas a lot of people, they're always looking back at with rose-tinted spectacles, how it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. And actually, I mean, I remember touring cars back in. I hear stuff all the time. Oh, super touring was this, super touring. I was at a load of super touring car races, helping a friend of mine, Chris Good, when he was in there. There were loads of boring races. There was quite small grids. There was a lot of privateers in there as well. It wasn't quite this thing, but because they had this half-hour program later on Grandstand with Murray, who was a legend, obviously, you know, it made it very exciting. But if you cut all those cameras together, because they probably had about 3 or 4 times the amount of cameras that you managed to have in the ITV coverage at the minute, but it just because it you know, the budget they had at the time, but you can make a very exciting half-hour race, can't you? Out of anything, really. You cut it together as a. So that was actually quite a big thing. So I agree with you. I mean, isn't it great you can go to all these different motorsport events and really you actually don't know who's going to be winning. You know, that's the thing with the GTs, touring cars, and the short oval stuff. You're never, again, short oval make it even, because you're always starting from the back. The quick guys are always in the back, aren't they? So that's why whenever I've done it, I've always started at the front. But going back to Alton Park, so I mean, I think it could be a bit of a changer, because also talking about that hybrid stuff, which sort of thought about when we were talking about it earlier on, the natural, because of the type of circuit it is, we're not talking about straights with 90-degree corners. Everything's on a slight curve wherever you're going. So actually having the hybrid isn't quite such an advantage, but it is an advantage in performance, but not an advantage just to be able to drive past. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree, and I mean, Matt might have a thought on this as well, but bearing in mind you can only use that hybrid when you've got to north of 75 miles an hour. You can't be straight on it coming out of the Iron Bend hairpin, for example, and by the time you have got to your 75 miles an hour, it's a reasonable chunk of that straight taken away. So, you know, out of corners, Matt, what do you think? Is there enough space to really use it, say coming out of Lodge down towards Old Hall, for example, because the corners come up pretty quickly?
I think out of Lodge to Old Hall is maybe one of the few places where you will be able to use it, just because the track's that little bit wider. I mean, like you say, coming out the island hairpin, even if you could hit the hybrid button the minute you turn out of that corner, it's not easy to get yourself into a position to try and get alongside on that drag up the hill, because it is so narrow. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to see much of an impact from it this weekend, simply because of the nature of the circuit, because it is so hard to overtake. This is one where you maybe did need the weight and the option tyre to mix things up a bit more.
See, I think we might have a bit of a old school. Let's hope not, because I don't like it, but a bit of an old school crash fest, I think, because people will be desperate to get past, and they will have an overlap of power, which they're going to be having 2 wheels on the grass by the time they get to where they want to deploy it, really. I think it could be a really exciting weekend and could really shake up the championship. And I think, you know, someone like Josh Cook, he's going to have to play the long game. As we said earlier on, he's very experienced that now. but that's easier said than done when you've got 28 other guys around you and girls who want to, get involved in the scene. So it could be a bit. I think there'll be a few nervous team managers coming towards the grid on the first race.
I think qualifying is going to be absolutely vital. As Matt said, it's a narrow place, Alton Park. It's not shrunk over the years. It's just that cars have got wider. I mean, don't forget, Alton Park was having Formula One races even in 1980. But as cars have got bigger, Alton can't get any wider. And therefore, nowadays, it's perceived as a narrow circuit. The run out of Cascades down to Island Bend, because it's a quick corner, you've got the momentum, then use the hybrid maybe, is probably your best bet. But that's going to mean that you've got a lot of people trying to outbrake into the hairpin, arriving a little bit quicker than they might ordinarily do, thanks to that extra boost. So if it goes well, they can look all heroic. But if there is going to be an old school crash fest type corner, it's going to be there, I suspect, as you suddenly get this banzai move coming up the inside. But qualifying, again, because of the nature of the circuit, is going to be absolutely vital. And then you come back to the narrowness of Alton Park and therefore the importance of finding clear track space in the qualifying session.
No, definitely. I mean, they're going back to the drivers. I was just thinking of other drivers who could do well. One driver we haven't mentioned, and really we should do, and I keep trying to get him on the programme, but he's always so busy, is Tom Ingram, because he's really, and he's just, I think he's got a lot going on at the minute. He's really is. I think he's not the dark horse for the championship by far, but I think he's probably my favourite for it. I think, he really has got it all going on, and there is a place that he's always gone well at.
Yeah, he just needs to keep banking points, doesn't he? One bad race was race one at Thruxton when he was 21st and out of the points, radically changes things. So he goes to Alton fourth in the standings rather than being the championship leader. But he's now wise enough and old enough, and he's been around the paddock long enough to know that that's not the championship over. You can still obviously bounce back from there. Just like you can, he's had one bad race. So could Josh. So could Ash. So could Colin Turkington ahead of him. Come back to qualifying. Yeah. Yes, Tom Ingram should be up at the pointy end. No argument. So should Rory Butcher, that we've already mentioned. So should Jake Hill. So should Colin Turkington. So also, we've not touched on them at all yet, should be Gordon Shedden and Dan Rowbottom, who had a win last year. So should Josh Cook. So probably ought to be Jason Plato. The list goes on. The Sicily BMWs, Adam Morgan and George Campbell. Now, sheer weight of numbers, that's 11 names I think I've listed. You can't have them all in the top six. That goes without saying. So something's got to give. Somebody's going to be disappointed. And we're talking of such fine margins these days. We used to talk about tenths in qualifying, then hundreds. Now we're on to thousands because they're so evenly matched. You've got to qualify well, and that means you've got to have a car that absolutely hits the ground running at the start of free practice one, doesn't change during the day, or if it changes for the better. Because you don't have that variable of the tyres and the weight anymore. So it's got to be done on pure pace. It's got to be done by getting you up to the front in the qualifying session.
And I'd actually disagree with something Shaun said there, because Shaun said Ingram's gone well at Alton Park in the past. I think Alton Park is probably Tom Ingram's worst circuit on the calendar of his career so far, because he went through that long spell with Speedworks of everyone going, oh, Ingram and Speedworks into their home weekend, they're going to have a great weekend. And then everything went wrong. And I mean, even last year when he switched to the Hyundai, he had the issue in qualifying, didn't he, that left him at the back of the grid. And all of a sudden, I think he got one top 10 finish from the 3 races. I'm pretty sure that Alton Park is the only circuit on the calendar where Ingram hasn't got onto the podium yet. And that's something that he'll want to try and put right, because for whatever reason, I spoke to him at Thruxton and said, Alton Park next, how do you think it's going to go? And he was like, well, it's always been crap in the past, so maybe this weekend things will improve. But
maybe I should write.
I don't bring it up when I talk.
Should do his PR maybe. If I did a press, it'd be like, I won't talk about whose press that is, but it's it's always positive. Let's put it that way. Bit of positive spin, never hurt anybody. But David touched on it there. I mean, the depth in the field now. In my short period of being involved in current touring cars, I can't remember it being that strong a depth. There's a good 16 to 18 drivers who I would class as, definite race-winning material.
It comes back in a way, Shaun, to your super touring point of earlier on, and how people say how much better it was in those days. Well, let's address the racing part of it first. It wasn't good racing. It was a good edit, which is what you touched on with the television side of it. We had one shot qualifying, one at a time qualifying, in the hope that people might make a mistake and it would shuffle the grid. We had pit stops to hope to shuffle the order. We certainly didn't get 17 winners in the season out of Super Touring. We didn't get full grids like we have now. There was always a certain amount of cannon fodder because the privateers that could run a Super Tourer could never do it as well as a manufacturer team with all the money and all the electronic gizmos that they had access to. So the back of this grid is much closer to the front, relatively speaking, than the back of a Super Touring grid was. And yes, people get misty-eyed about Super Tourers, but it's actually the liveries, I think, that do that. When you took some of those Super Tourers into club racing and took all the sponsors' liveries off, nobody cared about them. Nobody came to watch them then, but put them back in livery. Oh, great cars, these. So it's part of that nostalgia that fuels that. But the quality of the grid now is absolutely dynamite. And what's really good, I think, is that you've got this wave of young guys coming into it.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the good old boys, which touring car racing had a spell of being in the early noughties and in the 90s and in the 80s and the 70s. You know, these are drivers. We've talked about many of them. Ingram and a Cook are prime examples that are very, very good and have not yet peaked. They will get better and they will get better. Jake Hill's another example. The future of the championship is looking very, very good indeed, I reckon.
Yeah, and also the great thing for me personally, because I think sometimes motorsport gets lost in money, really. But I think all the teams are starting to really get it, and a lot of them always did. You've got to have the right peddler. So, you know, a lot of these guys, they haven't, you know, got a massive bank balance at home to pay for these drives. The teams are seeing the benefit of having the good drivers, so they get a good deal together, work hard to get sponsors, but also the drivers working hard, you know, to get their own personal sponsors to put their bid in, or whether they're getting paid, working hard. I think there's a real work ethic in the paddock, which probably wasn't not. I don't think it was as strong as before. I really actually think there's a lot of real professional drivers out there who are sort of making their money from going motor racing, which I think is great for the series.
And making it work, as you say, with that vast amount of effort and understanding what a sponsor wants. It's one of those marketing buzzwords, isn't it, that it's a partnership. But actually, it's true to a degree. It's not a case of put some stickers on the side of the car, give us the money. You know, what can we do to help you? Whether, in the case, going back to a previous sponsor, it was Ginsters giving away food because they wanted people to sample it, work with the team in order to do that. And so there is a hell of a lot more to it. You know, it's running a team as well. There's so much more to it than just putting stickers on the car and hoping for the best now. And it's the drivers working with the teams, working with that sponsor as well to get the most out of it. You know, if you look at team dynamics, you know, they've got this the relationship these days with Cataclean. Now that all fits really nicely because Dynamics have the long-standing sponsorship with Halfords, and Halfords is an absolutely key retailer for Cataclean. So you've got those two companies working together. The conduit for it is Team Dynamics. Plus, it also gives Dan Rowbottom a really good seat to go racing and took his first win last year. So it's win-win-win. Tick all the boxes across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, no, and another driver who works really hard away from the race car to make that whole deal work and keep Cataclean engaged in the whole programme, really. I mean, I don't know if a driver who's ever gone and done QVC before to keep his sponsor happy. So fair play to him for making that happen. But just be quickly before I ask you both who your favourites are, who you think is going to win the races at the weekend. Just going back, so this weekend, Dave, we've got the situation where you've got ITV4 and ITV1 as you know, which I think is a fantastic opportunity for British touring cars to. Well, I keep seeing stuff on the internet where people are moaning that they've got to change their TV to record something different. Even I can do that, and I'm the most untechnical person you could ever know, really. But it's a fantastic opportunity, you know, for British touring cars to do exactly that, to give more back to the sponsors, to hopefully, you know, have more people involved, more sponsors involved, to actually make the series stronger and stronger.
It gave us an extra 250,000 viewers for Brands Hatch by going on to the main channel, as ITV call it. And yeah, I saw some of this on Twitter from people saying, "Oh, I didn't know it was going on ITV1 and it didn't pick up on my record." bear in mind, he says as an old fart, that up until 1988, the championship didn't get television coverage. So you're spoiled now, not only with ITV, but with qualifying on the hub, with all of this that is available on apps or on social media or wherever you find your fix of the British Touring Car Championship. In 1984, he says, going right back, in the days that there was a programme on the BBC called Grandstand, they used to go and do the Easter Monday Thruxton event live, and they would show the European Formula 2 Championship and the British Formula 3 Championship. And one year they showed one extra race. Bear in mind that the, as it was then called, British Saloon Car Championship was there as well. Autosport magazine was in outcry that the BBC had ignored filming the British Saloon Car Championship in favour of a round of the Ford Credit Fiesta Challenge, because in it was Mike Smith. So it was great. You had a Fiesta race on TV, but the British Saloon Car Championship wasn't deemed important enough to be on television. I was reading a quote the other day from the 1980 Saloon Car Championship review in Autosport. John Webb, who was the great impresario that oversaw Brands and at the time Mallory and Alton and Snetterton, was quoted as saying that the British Saloon Car Championship will never be a headline race. It doesn't bring any more spectators than a big club meeting. The only way that you could run that is with something bigger, like for British Formula 1 Championship or Thunder Sports, which ultimately came out a few years later. Well, how the world has changed, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You've been live, and now it is very much not only a headline race, but the headline championship and the headline package in the country. It's a very, very different world. So, yes, fans should be very, very appreciative of what Alan Gow has made this, what ITV have put in. So if you have to go and look for it a little bit harder, because it's flicking channels once in a while, it's a lot better than we had in the 1970s or the 1980s, or even the 90s when it was purely highlights a couple of weeks later. It's a very, very different animal these days.
So I'm looking forward to, maybe if you get on ITV1, somebody might spot you, talent spot you, and we'll see you on Love Island next year, David. What do you reckon?
Oh, now there's a thought. I think Tim Harvey on Love Island. That would be something. That would be something.
It could be a different demographic, possibly.
Well, surely we'd stick Paul on Love Island. You know, he does Gogglebox and everything already, so that can be his next little jaunt.
Not sure people can understand him. That's the problem.
Oh, I don't know. He's got a certain charm. I think a certain charm.
He's got something.
The other good thing about being on I was going to say the other thing about being on ITV was that for a couple of hours the residents of Midsummer are safe because there are fewer murders. So that's another blessing for estate agents in Midsummer. We're doing very well there.
Exactly. So going forward to Walton Park, who do you reckon? Should I start off and see who I reckon might be up there winning races? So I'll start with my first three. So I'll go with one driver we haven't mentioned too much, but again is doing quite a great job of grabbing points. There's a few of them there who are sort of scoring 30 to 40 points a weekend at the moment. But I mean, Colin Turkington's been strong. So looking at Colin, I wouldn't be surprised then to see a front wheel drive sneak in there at some point or other. And then I would think Rory Butcher, as I mentioned him earlier on, for a race 2 win. And then how about George Gamble for a race 3 reverse grid win? He's really impressed me really from the start of testing. But really impressive. But again, favouring the rear-wheel drives, Alton Park, it always has done. But having said that, I mean, the amount of times we've said that in previous years, and we end up with 3 race wins for front-wheel drive. So what am I to say? But how about you, David? Who do you reckon's up there?
Hang on, I need to do this scientifically. So I have an entry list and I have a pen, and if I just stick one into the other. Again, you come back to the weighted numbers. I think Josh Cook could be on for another win, because if he can qualify well, hard to overtake.
The thing is qualifying is where the boost will be a problem, because he's going to have 0 seconds of boost. So up Play Hill, out of Lodge, that sort of, that is going to be a struggle. I reckon there's a good 3.5 tenths compared to having full amount of round there. I would have thought 3.5, 4 tenths possible. Especially up the hill. If you think up the hill there. And in the races, you're not going to be able to use it so much. You're not going to have as much advantage just because you won't be able to get past them. But actually, qualifying is where the boost is going to really happen.
I'm going to go for Gordon Shedden for one race.
Yeah.
I'm going to offer you Ash Sutton for another. We haven't really
yes,
touched on the race, but the
No,
motor base forms have been getting better and better. You know, poor old Dan Camish has been hit by that fire at Donington and then by being turfed off at Thruxton, so we've not seen the best out of him. But if you look at the fact that Ash has had, 4 podiums now, banked thirds in all the races at Thruxton, that car's almost there. And Motorbase now looks like a proper team, doesn't it? I mean, it's a bit unfair to call it Sutton Carosa Osborne Racing, but it's Motorbase in name only, really. It's come on in leaps and bounds. So let's go for Ash for a win. And then the reverse grid race, you might be right about George Gamble. And I think he's done an outstanding job this season. He's been really, really impressive. So, yeah, him or Adam Morgan for the third race.
Yeah. No, I get it. And how about you, Matt? You got any
thoughts on the race? You two have kind of stolen my thunder on that one because I think,
that's why I got in early. That's why I got in early.
leave me to the end. I mean, Colin Turkington's one that you've got to look at as being strong. He's got a really good record at Alton Park in the past. He's won 10 times. There's only Jason Plato who's won more times. So, maybe this could be the weekend when things go well for Jason as well, because that BTC Racing Honda is a proven package around there. Senna Proctor won in it last year. So I think I'd probably go Colin race 1. If I'm looking at a front-wheel drive car, I'd probably go one of Josh, Ash Sutton, who David touched on, or maybe Jason. In reverse grid, let's go a bit left field. If it is going to be difficult to overtake round there, what about someone like maybe Dan Lloyd for the reverse grid? Because he's been consistently in the top 10. So if he can get into that top 10 in race 2, get a reverse grid and keep the pack behind, who knows, maybe we could see someone like Dan or a new winner for this season. But there are a couple of things stats-wise for Alton Park. I'll just drop in before we wrap things up. So Dan Camish and Aidan Moffat, they both have landmark races this weekend. Dan will do his 100th start. Aidan Moffat will do his 250th start. Race 2 on Sunday, that will be the 300th race victory for an NGTC car. So another landmark there. We've already had the 100th pole this year. I think 300th fastest lap was Tom Ingram's at Thruxton last time out. And then the Honda, the FK8, as we've touched on, it's a proven package around there in the past. If there are 3 podium finishes for the FK8, it'll bring up a century this weekend as well. So that's one that it's not inconceivable that could happen as well.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, I mean, it shows you the depth of strength of depth, really, when we're talking about, Aidan Moffat doing his 250th race. I remember him, he started alongside me on the grid, I think, in 2013. I was in a little Golf and he was in a Team Hard Passat. So how things move on. I think he was only at 16 then, I think, as well. So he's still a young lad. But going on to that, thanks very much, David. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy man. And thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to Alton Park. Let's hope we have another rip-roaring success and they all keep it on the island. But I think we're going to see a few different winners this weekend. Thanks for joining us.